First, I hope this thing works. And second, let's talk about categorical logic. Perhaps the proper way to start is to recall or make a recapitulation of the important points from the previous meeting. In the last meeting, we covered three essential components of the first chapter, which is about basic concepts. The first thing that we covered was the notion of an argument and its components, namely the premises and the conclusion. Then we moved on to the second part of that chapter, which is about non-argumentative passages. It's here when we started to recognize the arguments from plain sentences or passages that may resemble, time and again, an argument. The third was when we attempted to identify the forms of an argument present at hand. According to Aristotle, and this is reiterated by, Harley in his book, there are two forms of an argument. The first form is deductive, and the other one is inductive argument or inductive form. Now, there was a particular highlight on the presence of non-argumentative passages. We made a long discussion about them during the last meeting because they are tricky passages. Now, to recap an important point, I'd say that perhaps the most or the example of a non-argumentative passage that has the most extension or has most comprehensive extension is an expository passage. My argument is that it is the mostly extended form of non-argumentative passage since it can come in the form of, let's say, explanation, and sometimes it comes in the form of an advice or a warning or illustration and a report. In other words, this um, expository passage has a wider extension. Now, a deductive argument is again one that or one whose structure eventually um, leads to a necessarily valid um, conclusion or value claim, no, not value claim, validity claim, so that um, a deductive argument contains all true premises, or that the premises that a deductive argument contains are all true. They are necessary true premises. On or meanwhile, an inductive argument is one whose validity claim remains contingent. In other words, the premises that an inductive argument contains are only partly true. The premises might be true, but the conclusion doesn't have to follow. So this is more or less a very short overview of the important points we made thus far. Today, we will talk about categorical logic. Let me show you our current location. You can see on your left an excerpt from the syllabus, and on your right is a shot taken from the textbook. So we are still in parts 2 and 3, which covers chapters 1 and 2 about terms and ideas, judgment, and propositions. Now, these discussions here are reflected in the chapter 4 of the textbook, which is about categorical propositions. Now, that is the reason why I wanted you to jump right away to this chapter and skip chapters 2 and 3. Now, by all means, chapters 2 and 3 are important, but it's just that they are not reflected in our handout. However, the assurance that I can give you is that we can do without them. I mean, we can still proceed with our discussion even without passing by those details in chapter 2 and 3. So, first task is to go by the white paper here. Now, we begin with Aristotle's theory of idiogenesis, or the theory of cognitive linguistic metastructure. Idiogenesis refers to the origin or birth of an idea. From another article I read, it refers to the origin or birth of a mental picture, and that mental picture is known as an idea or essence of a particular thing. To Aristotle, there is this two-tier structure of both cognition and language. We have mental acts below and linguistic expression above. Aristotle did not say that cognition is superior to language or other way around. He said that they work hand in hand because they both of them process the empirical datum that is turned over by the sense perception. Now, to Aristotle, the first mental activity is simple apprehension. Here, the mind or the intellect, by the way, to Aristotle, there are two kinds of intellect, the active and the passive intellect. In simple apprehension, the active intellect organizes everything, accepts the empirical datum or data from sense perception, and then elevates it through the process of abstraction here above. Abstracting the active intellect began or begins to um, take away all unessential or unnecessary characteristic of the datum. Here, the intellect, which is active, denudes or strips that datum of its what unessential components and turns it over again, I mean the refined product, to the passive intellect. Here, in the passive intellect, according to Aristotle, an idea is formed, or an eidos, a mental image, which is known as phantasm, is had. If you articulate that mental image or that idea, then you use terms. So, terms are linguistic expressions of the mental images that are the outcome of the process of abstraction. From simple apprehension comes the activity of judgment. Judgment is defined as an activity of the mind where the human mind or the intellect begins to set the relationship between the terms or categories as observed on an experiential mode. By that, Aristotle meant that the names or terms or categories are actually situated randomly on the empirical life or empirical moment. So what our mind does is it arranges these scattered terminologies and concepts or names um, and make by setting the relationship. This happens all in the mind, but when we articulate that, we form propositions so that um, at the level of the proposition, there is now a clear distinction between terms and not only that there is the clear distinction, but also that the relationship between terms is being set, is being established. From judgment follows reasoning, which is the last part of the mental act or the last mental activity that our human mind conducts. Reasoning is the crown glory of all of this epistemic search or activity, and reasoning is best linguistically expressed in inference or in the inferences that we put up every day, so that an inference, which is also known time and again as argument, is the verbal expression of the reasoning activity here within. Now, this whole structure is the structure of knowing. Knowing cannot be possible if one of these um, components is missing. But then again, our focus in the chapter is only about proposition. And from this, we build, the whole discussion. Let's talk about terms. Well, the basic idea is that the word idea is a term. And following Aristotle, we say that terms are the linguistic expressions of the ideas we think about or employ both in everyday life and in technical setting. There are several terms here I'd like you to consider. And as you observe, they come most of the time in random, uncoherent, or incoherent circumstances. But you notice that these terms are names. They are both proper and improper names. So names and terms are the same words. But then not all words are terms because not all words are names. Take, for example, the word the or a or an, or take, excuse me, for example, an adjective beautiful or colorful or fast or tall, short, lively. Those words are not terms because they are not names. They are not terms because they don't convey an idea, but they can be of help in making an idea more vivid or more colorful to some extent. To short, to cut it short, the understanding of an idea is limited to the consideration of a name. Again, this name may come in the form of an improper uh, calling or the proper one. So we exclude the possibility of having terms outside the category of names. But then we have to consider that there are differences also in the terms that we use every day or in technical setup. Now, there are terms that have real connotation, while others have logical sense, and last, equivocal terms. Now, real terms like animals, commodity, trees, or tree, master, laptop are those that have direct empirical um, reference, while logical terms are abstract terms like existence, freedom, society, unicorn, justice, simulacra. And equivocal terms are those that have two or more than two senses, and they can sometimes confuse our conversation. Now, in our study, we will use both real and logical concepts or terms, and we have to consider that these terms are important to the building up of the whole process of knowing itself. Bertrand Russell, an English philosopher and also a key proponent in logical positivism or analytic logic, once mentioned that in his work Logical Atomism, that if even just one faulty term that you use in grand in a grand paragraph or statement can complicate that statement, no matter how uh, polemically beautiful it is. If the terms that are embedded in it are problematic, the entire polemic or setup becomes problematic. Or one faulty term affects the the soundness of an argument. That is why we have to be very careful also in using the terms time and again that we use every day. Sometimes it's good to um, or it seems nice, seems really appealing to be very generous in our use of words or terms, but we have to analyze them because sometimes they make up or they break um, they break the whole point that we are trying to show. And from here, we move on to the next categorical propositions as the next important structure for the entire epistemic pursuit. Now, I'll provide you with several examples here of a proposition. We have proposition 1, 2, and 3, and you notice, and it must be, of course, of great necessity that they are present there, that the terms or categories names are being put into a relation. So remember that judgment is a mental activity that sets up the relationship between terms and categories. In the proposition number 1, we see several words, but we can only find the two important terms, uh, which are the subject and the predicate. Now we have here the first proposition saying only few students are passionate academics. But there are only two important terms here because there are only two terms in a proposition. We have the term students and the term academics. The the what's this? The adjective few and passionate are well important, but only because they add flavor or color to the statement. But essentially they can be dispensed with as long as the term student here, which is our subject term, and the term academics here, again, our predicate term are present, then we are safe. We can now have a proposition. And propositions, when piled up properly, can build an argument. So if you notice this one here, this whole selection is already an argument. And oh, sorry, not yet, but we can make it an argument if we add a conclusion indicator here at the bottom, right? So this is a proposition. This is going to be the main topic for today, but we'll just uh, get an overview of it instead of staying with it. We go to next one, to the last part of the structure of knowing is the inference. And um, there are two forms of inference. One is immediate inference, and the second one is immediate inference. By the way, an immediate inference is comprised only of two propositions. One is a premise, and the other one is the conclusion already. While the immediate inference composes or is composed of two or more than two premises and a conclusion. An example of immediate inference is a categorical syllogism, and also immediate inferences can be expressed in hypothetical form. Now, I provided here some examples of categorical syllogism, and I know that they are not new to you guys anymore because we've been talking about this since the beginning of the class. Perhaps the only highlight here in this slide particularly is to make us aware of how the other components or other epistemic structures of terms and prepositions are all utilized for the building up of an argument. In other words, the whole epistemic process, the process of knowing, um, contains this sophisticated relationship between terms and prepositions and eventually the inferential forms. That's all that there is. And if we go beyond that, perhaps we now start to discuss about the limits of Aristotle. But that's the thing for an overview of you know uh, the whole process of idiogenesis or the birth of an idea. We started with how an idea was born and how it's being placed in a relationship, in a proposition, and how it becomes an indispensable moment in the formation of knowledge or of knowing. Well, that was the discussion for the process of idiogenesis and the whole idea of the structure of knowing. Now, what comes next is our discussion of the categorical propositions themselves. We focus on the chapters and sections in Harley's book as we move along. I'd like us to focus on the the points here in 4.1, 4.2, and 4.3 and try to understand um, how complicated and expansive or comprehensive a proposition really is. I'd like us to follow the analytical breakdown of the components and of the propositions and how they work and what are their limitations. So we move on. So what we have here in 4.1 is a discussion on the components and yeah, perhaps the nature of a categorical proposition. This is not a new thing to us because we've known this already back in the previous slides and even back in our previous discussions or meetings. So a proposition is any statement that relates to classes or categories as reflected by terms. And and I think by now we already knew the nuances of these names, right? When we say terms and the whole string of discussion comes back to us in a flash, and we now know what non-terms are, or we now know what words are non-terms, and the limitation of terms themselves and their nuances, like they have this kind of real terms and logical terms and equivocal terms. So um, we say any statement because not all statements time and again are propositional statements. Propositions are declarative statements and or uh, descriptive statements only. But what is important here in the discussion is a highlight on the relationship between subject and predicate in a proposition or subject and predicate terms as being mediated by this small letter C here, which is copula, right? So in a proposition, there is subject, predicate, and the copula. I propose that we take a look at several examples here of propositions. They are simple statements. They contain subject predicate relationships and that they describe a particular state of affairs. And more important is that they all contain truth claims or truth values within them. So when we let's pick this one up and evaluate this statement here by the philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein. Now he says that the world is always a case, and to him that's true. That is a necessarily true statement. It's a tautology. But here, when you say pigs fly, then you visit the old problematic about modal logic. And in modal logic, pigs fly is a true statement only in a world where pigs do fly, right? Now let us further break these sentences into their basic components. For further breakdown, we use this legend of the terms subject and predicate. I placed here the copula, but where is it? Anyway, we'll get back to it. But we have here the subject and the predicate, and our old examples. I crossed out the copula to indicate that it's a copula, and other examples. Oh, there it is. It's back. So the copula is what stays in the middle here, uh, but we'll come to know more about it as we move along. Further examples are these ones. Still, we follow the same process, but with more highlight on the terms themselves. Yeah, so term students, picture, states are subject terms, and terms academics, words, and economies are our predicate terms. Now, this is important to be highlighted because remember that prepositions actually uh, relate terms, right? But because these terms are also representing a particular class, so these terms are not only in themselves terms, mere words, but they represent a particular class, a particular collective, or a particular genus or species of a particular thing. And the next slide, that the real nature of a proposition is to show it shows a picture, a vivid picture, but perhaps sometimes not so vivid, of reality. So, for instance, you say there is a green ball on the table, then you provide a picture of a green ball on the table. Or if you say that the cat is purring, or that that it's raining outside, or that the bicycle is black, or that birds are chirping, or that the Philippine economy is sinking. These all are pictures of a reality that are being captured by the proposition. I remember the last paragraph of the novel, satirical novel written by George Orwell, Animal Farm. I'm going to share it with the statement or the, that part with you. So we have here, yeah, it says 12 voices were shouting in anger and they were all alike. No question now what had happened to the faces of the pigs. The creatures outside looked from pig to man, and from man to pig, and from pig to man, and again. But already it was impossible to say which was which. It's a, to me, very emphatic like ending in the story. It talks about, it's a picture of, it talks uh, about pigs and human beings in a satirical way having the same character, having the same face, having the same tendencies, right? So the prepositions here are picturing out a reality about pigs and about men, that they are actually identical. So this is not argumentative. This is just a pure description of what happened in a particular circumstance in the novel. And uh, it doesn't only uh, show a particular picture, it also gives us an idea that something is being included or being excluded. It talks about membership um, between terms in in a selection. So if we go back to this example, rather easy example here, we have here some third world states are developing economies. Our main terms here are actually states or third world states and developing economies or economies, right? Now, um, this proposition says, or the subject term world states, third world states here are being included in the predicate term developing economy. So that um, what is being shown or what is being done by a proposition is that it shows either some or all parts of the class denoted by the subject term is excluded from or included in the predicate term. So when you talk about developing economies, you realize that some of these developing economies are third world states, or that uh, there are members in the class of developing economies that are third world states class. So that's what the proposition does. It shows a clear picture, or maybe not a so clear picture, and at the same time, it provides a relationship of exclusion and or inclusion, in other words, of a membership. Now, in order to prove at least how the whole thing works, we resort to consulting Leonhard Euler's diagram. This is going to be interesting because it now shows clearly the relationship of exclusion and of inclusion of or between terms in the statement. Let's see what happens here. What we have here is a rather scattered presentation of several propositions and their equivalents in Venn diagram. Now, the first proposition here says that all third world states are developing economies. The other one says some third world states are developing economies and some third world states are not developing economies and no third world states are developing economies. Now this is again is a presentation of how terms do exclude each other. Remember that each term represents a particular class, so that we have two classes in a proposition because there are two terms, the subject and the predicate. Now, in the first proposition, it is clear that the S class, which is a class of third world states, is included in the predicate term or in the P in the class of developing economy, so that and in this statement, it's impossible for S to get out as in like this because it is essentially tied to the bigger uh, class of developing economies. The same thing is happening, or the same thing holds true for this relationship here, where it says that the particular highlight is that some aspects of the or some aspects or yeah or members of the developing economies class um, are third world states. So it's still this propositions show a certain sense of inclusion, right? The terms do include each other. Um, it's different with this presentation here because very clearly there is a separation, a break, a gap between, a void, a non-relationship between two classes or terms. So that here, when you say some third world states are not developing economies, the subject term or the subject or the third world states class is excluded the from the predicate from the developing economies class. And so and also the same thing goes for the for this kind of relationship, right? So that is what propositions do. They show relationship and of exclusion and of inclusion. Moving on, we can now see how they are properly situated. We have the standard propositional forms here above, and we have A, I, E, and oh no, this is not A. This is supposedly what? This is O proposition. Error. Anyway, so we have universal affirmative proposition says all SSP, and universal negative proposition that says no SSP, um, particular affirmative, some SSP, and some S is not P. Now, there's another way of reducing this statements into a more formal, like formal uh, pattern, and this is what we do. This is what we can exactly find in 4.2 of the PDF. We have here a formal notation that presents not only the kinds of propositions but also their qualitative and quantitative aspects. We can see the vertical lines here, or vertical boxes, elongated boxes, and also the horizontal boxes. Now, the vertical lines or the vertical boxes represent the quality of the proposition, while the horizontal ones pertain to their quantity. Now, you notice by their quantity, there are two um, universal propositions, the A proposition and the E proposition. So there are universal affirmative statements and universal negative statements. By virtue of their quantity also below, we have here particular propositions. We have particular affirmative propositions and particular negative propositions. With regard their quality, they can be expressed affirmatively and negatively. So there are affirmative propositions, namely A propositions and I propositions. And we also have negative propositions in E and O. So uh, there are also other ways of understanding them, and that is when we talk about their distribution. Okay, here is a rather complicated part, and I really want you to follow this carefully. Slowly, I'll discuss the points. Now, we have learned that there are two dimensions or aspects of proposition. The first is its quantity, and the other one is equality. So there are universal affirmative propositions and universal negative propositions, particular affirmative propositions, sorry, yes, and particular negative propositions. Now, what what do we make of this notion here? What is a distribution of term, or what is term distribution? Now, term distribution refers to the membership, to the extent to which the membership can be, um, or the reach of membership, or of accommodation and inclusion that each class being represented by a term in a proposition possesses. So when we talk about distribution of terms, we talk about the reach or the extent to which a particular class in a particular proposition uh, can 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 be uh, can can be extended. So accordingly, I don't know if that makes sense, but don't worry because we're going to show that later in the forthcoming discussion. Um, so according to Aristotle, as presented by Patrick Hurley, of course, universal propositions here, namely A and E propositions, have or do possess what? What do they possess? Universal subject uh, distribution. Remember, this is um, what? The horizontal line represents what? Represents the quantity, right? Of the proposition here in the box. So A and E propositions, rather universal propositions, contain universal subject terms, while particular or universal subject terms or distributed subject terms, their subject terms, their reach and extension can be everywhere, can be all encompassing, while the particular uh, propositions below contain particular or undistributed subject terms, right? Because The quantity of the proposition, time and again, is best determined by the quantity indicators that it carries, correct? There are indicators like all, some, few, only, many, each, and I think those indicators are fairly sketched in the textbook. I don't want to go over them again and again and again because they don't have to be discussed. So I was saying that there are indicators for the quantity and yeah of the proposition, right? And going back to the main point, um, the horizontal lines here talk about the quantity of the subject, so that there for your I proposition, you'll get an undistributed or particular subject term. Now, regarding the distribution of terms for the uh, for for this vertical lines, the for this aspect, the it's the predicate term that is being uh, distributed, so that for affirmative, right, affirmative propositions, you'll get undistributed predicate terms, but for negative propositions like E and O, you will get what? You will get distributed predicate terms. Now, this is what it's like. I'd like you to focus on the portion here of the monitor, and you'll see here the outcome of what I've been talking about. So what I meant earlier was this: the affirmative propositions get particular or undistributed predicate terms, while the negative propositions all get universal predicate terms. Is wrong, is supposedly you, right? While the affirmative general propositions, I mean universal propositions, get what? Distributed subject terms or universal subject terms, and the particular propositions get particular subject terms. So that's how this one gets to be like synthesized. Now, what is the relevance of this? This is relevant, really very important, especially if we now start to discuss rules for what syllogistic validity. We'll get to really understand how this works and how they are in a particular setup. But for now, I think it's important for us to just have a look at them and try to prove uh, how they work and where they probably fit. This is where 4.3 of textbook comes in. And of course, we'll get a very good presentation, maybe proof, um, as we borrow the, you know, the infamous Venn diagram. This gives me a headache all the time, but okay, let's just do this. We can do it. Um, so what does a Venn diagram prove or show? It shows the relationship, well, between classes, right? Class S and class P. Now, this is very much different from Euler's diagram because Euler had a non-uniform presentation of propositions or relationship. But Venn diagram is like uniform all throughout. I mean, he uses this overlapping concentrics here. Anyway, so this represents class S and represents class P, subject, predicate. In our case, we have Selimanians, and Selimanians are advocates for peace. So the class of Selimanians and the class of individuals who are advocates of or for peace. So if we now try to understand the wait or label or maybe name the regions here inside the circles, then we'll have this region here which says this region is a class of Selimanians but are not P class, so S non-P class, right? But this one here in the center is the SP class of Suleimanian and the class of advocates for peace. So they overlap. And then the class for advocates of peace, but not for Suleimanian. So P non-S class. Outside, we have this, both the non-SP class or non-PS class. All right. Um, we move forward. So what do we hold, or how does this Venn diagram hold and connect to the propositional problems or distribution of terms? Now, um, consider this. So all SSP says Suleimanians, all Suleimanians are advocates for peace, right? So Venn diagram. The by the way, the shaded area means null or zero membership, right? So it means zero. There are no members here, right? There are no members here. Um, remember that. In other words, the this proposition here, all SSP, does not actually point here, or to some extent it does, but in reverse, only in reverse, because it actually shows more this part. This is the class of S that is P inside P, right? All S is P. In other words, the class of Suleimanians is smaller than the class of those who are advocates for peace, or the P sub P term here. Now this region here is open because it points to the class of um, it is reserved for the class of advocates, or for the members of the class of advocates for peace that are not Suleimanian. So these are P but non-S, right? Remember, this is P non-S, but this is region of P that is reserved for non-Suleimanians. Now remember also that the presentation here is SU and PP, right? Now the thing is that this is universal subject, distributed subject. It refers to all, right? All S members that are P. But it only refers to only an aspect of P, right? Very particular. You know, see how the distribution of terms work, right? And how this one uh, connects or relates or proves the previous presentation. Yes, it represents the class of P, but it only represents a particular membership in the class of P. While this one represents everyone in the class of S that are members of P. So this is how the distribution of terms work. Again, I hope you got it. I hope I was able to make a clear presentation. The universal distribution here refers to all members of S that are um, well, um, members of P. And the predicate particular here only refers to this part. And you know very well it's only particular because there are some members of P that are not S. Now the null portion here, or the null region of the diagram, is the non-membership. In other words, in by no means can a Selimanian exist outside the P class. So no Selimanians are non-peace advocates, because if there were Selimanians, they were all peace advocates. That's, I think, the most uh, appropriate way of putting it. If Selimanians exist, they are essentially peace advocates. Therefore, no Selimanians exist outside the class of peace advocates. That is why it's zero here. It's null here in the region. Well, the same presentation or thing holds true for the I proposition. Remember, I proposition is this one, right? SPPP. So some SSP, we use an X mark here to denote membership. There is a member, at least one member. Okay, there is a membership here. That's how they put it. Right. So SP SP, it refers only to SP. Okay, look, it's all particular, right? It's all particular. Because again, they are only an aspect of both classes. That's how we understand this. They are only an aspect of both S and P classes. That's easy. No sweat, but gives me a headache again all the time. Moving on. All right, and here is another example of a problem. Uh, it says this. To denote zero membership or null, right? So it's universal. No one stays here. Nobody, right? No member. Zero membership. Nobody is allowed to stay there. That's it. Very easy, okay? And the last, but of course not the least, still remains problematic. And we'll try to understand what makes it so. So here is a formula. Right, so where does this fall in the diagram? Well, pretty much here. This universalistic tendency, it's not even touched, right? You can see two or double solid, not necessarily empty, but uh, untouched universal condition of the class for advocates. So it is completely excluded, right? Um, it shows complete exclusion. Therefore, the class of advocates remains closed in itself, universal. It's not contaminated by what? A member that is a Sulimanian. And that's how it's uh, it's uh, it's proven by the use of Venn diagram. So this is also like Venn diagram is used for proof, for especially for set theory and for diabolical problems in logic later. Don't worry, we have a lot of those problematics to solve, but for now we settle on this. Now, really, that's the end. Oh, so that's the end. There's one point though that I'd really like to discuss, but I don't I don't see it fit at the moment. Because it might take another round or bouts of discussion to finish and elucidate it. Not to complicate things, I decided to just settle with what you've heard. And an assignment follows this part. Thank you. I hope you learned something.